first place of a nation would be a fairly auspicious place for fishing, they're pretty laid back. So if you decide to go looking for it, all you've got to look for is a flagpole, find the Union Jack next to a bus stop, across the road from another foreign trader, McDonald's. That's all it is, very low key. Now, there was some argument as to who the first person to set foot in the colony was. There was a fellow by the name of Lieutenant George Johnson, and he proudly told everyone he ever met for the rest of his life that he was the first person to set foot in the new colony. There was, however, another fellow by the name of James Root, and he claimed he was the first person to set foot in the colony. And he claimed he was the first to carry George Johnson on his back, because George Johnson didn't want to get his food wet. Now, because James Root was a convict and an Irishman, nobody really paid him much attention. So he didn't George Johnson to the street. Now guys, the reason they stopped here is because they found the freshwater stream large enough. Now guys, the original name for this is going to be Albion, and the name for Britain. But when they got here, they decided instead to name it after the guy who paid for the whole expedition, Viscount Smith. So any Canadians here today at all? No? Okay, so there is also a city in Canada, and it is named after the same guy. But please don't get those confused on the travel itinerary, or else you'll turn up there very upset. Alright guys, we're off now, so wander around.
ಸಿಡ್ನಿ ಹೆಂಗ್ ಶುರುವಾಯ್ತು, ಯಾರು ಬಂದ್ರು, ಯಾರು ಮ್ಯಾಪ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು? Shit. Filter ತಿಂತಾ ಇದೆ. Be careful. ಮೋರಿ ವಾಸನೆ. Okay, everyone see picture up there? Okay, so that's the image of a fellow by the name of Jack Bundy. Jack Bundy is going to head like a little young boy. So guys, follow me down here. How long is the tour, sir?
Which tour? This one? This one about an hour and a half.
Oh. That's all?
We have even ice cream open in the map, Daddy.
Okay guys, so across the road here we've got the old police station, and the first thing you might notice about this building is up the top there, the lion with the baton in its mouth and the crown on top, and that's to signify British legal rule over Australia. The next thing you might notice about that building is that it's rather fortress-like, and that's because it's the third police station built on this site. The other two were built out of wood. Can you guess what happened to those?
They destroyed.
Spot on. Now the reason for that is this. Right behind us used to be the Port of Sydney. So the ships would pull up, a sailor would jump off, he'd make a beeline for the nearest pub. He'd get bowling drunk, get up to no good, and get locked up in the jailhouse. Then, during the night, his shipmates would come, spring him out of prison, set fire to the building, jump onto a ship, sail off to another port, and just do it all over again. So it's after the second
Pirates
time
of the Caribbean.
they decided to go with something that's a little less burning, and they built it out of stone. Now this building here dates back to 1828. 1882 I should say rather.
What's VR on top?
VR? Victoria, Regina. That's so Queen Victoria.
Oh.
That's Victoria Reign. So
Virtual reality.
guys, if you'd like to jump up, we're going to head straight through this tunnel, down the nurse's walk, and turn into the surgeon's court. What's the medical
ಈ ಬಾರ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕುಡಿದು ಗಲಾಟೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಅವರು ಪೈರೇಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಸ್ಟೇಷನ್ ಒಳಗೆ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರೆ 3ನೇ ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಸ್ಟೇಷನ್ ಅಂತೆ ಇದೇ ಜಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಟ್ಟಿರೋದು ಒಳಗೆ ಹಾಕಿ ಸುಟ್ಬಿಡೋರಂತೆ ಸುಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಓಡೋಗ್ಬಿಡೋರಂತೆ ಓಡೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮತ್ತೆ ಬರೋದು ಮತ್ತೆ ಹಂಗೆ ಮಾಡೋರಂತೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಲ್ಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಕಟ್ಟಿದಾರಂತೆ ಬಿಲ್ಡಿಂಗ್ ಇದು ಸುಡಬಾರ್ದು 19 ಯಾವಾಗ 1890 ಸುಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ನರ್ಸಸ್ ವಾಕ್
down through the tunnel, which is called the nurse's walk, through the court I should say, and we turn right into this alleyway here called the nurse's walk. Now these are medical names because this area here was the site of Sydney's first hospital. So it was a very simple building, and attached to it was a herb garden growing medicinal herbs to supplement their first aid supplies. So that's why you have the medical names around here. What we're going to do guys, we're going to walk up here and I'll talk about this alleyway. So this alleyway here is called the Suez Canal, S-U-E-Z, and that's a bit of a play on words because back in the day this was known as the Suez Canal, S-C-W-E-R-S, as in Zurich. That's because in the early days of the colony there was no plumbing. So you just get a bucket of good stuff, throw it into the alleyway and let gravity do its thing. So if we were standing down there way back when on a rainy afternoon, it's a pretty god-awful place to be standing. Especially when you consider you're only a stone's throw away from Sydney's first hospital. It's exactly a great mix, isn't it? Now, these alleyways and the rocks in general were ruled by violent street gangs, known as pushers. And they duke it out, the most well-known gang I should say, is called the Rocks Push. And they duke it out with less scarily named gangs like the Straw Hat Gang or the Cabbage Street Boys. Terrifying, aren't they? Now, their weapon of choice was a sock full of wet sand. Now that doesn't sound too brutal, but let's break it down. You get a sock and you pack that sand down tight. Try and knock the end, swing around, clock your head with it, it's going to do a fair bit of damage. It's a makeshift stat basically. And the best part is that when the police come and they're looking for a weapon, all they've got to do is undo that knot, get the sand out, shoe back on, wet sock on, shoe back on, squelch away, perfect crime. So it's actually rather ingenious. And their victims back then were the tourists of the day, and the tourists of the day were the sailors. Now, the modern day tourists are yourselves, so I usually give the warning, if you see anyone walking around Sydney with a wet sock, give them a wide berth, okay? You've been warned.
ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ರೌಡಿಗಳಿದ್ದವರು ಸಾಕ್ಸ್ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಮರಳಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇಷ್ಟಪ್ಪ ಮರಳಾಕಿ ತಿರುಗಿಸ್ ತಲೆ ಹೊಡೆದು ಕೊಲೆಗಳು ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡೋರಂತೆ.
Alright guys, so we are in Greenway Lane, and Greenway Lane is named after this guy, Francis Greenway. convict architect. Now, when he was back in England, he was just an architect, but he was also a forger, and he got arrested and appeared before the court. And as soon as the judge found out that he was an architect, it was fantastic. We need some of those in Sydney. Guilty. Off you go. So he was transported out here and became a convict architect. Now, he arrived at a good time because prior to his arrival, we had a governor called William Bligh. And at that time, everyone in the colony was paid in rum. So, as you'd imagine, the productivity levels of society being paid by rum were pretty low. So, just before Francis arrived, there was a new governor instated, Lachlan Macquarie. And when he was instated, he brought along with him currency in the form of coins and notes. So, Francis arrived here, there was currency now being used, no one was drunk in the street, well, most people weren't. Productivity levels rose, he arrived here with a head full of designs, and that's how we got all these buildings here. Now, some of these buildings are located within Sydney itself, others are further afield, and one of these buildings we will see further on the tour today. And I'll just give you the caveat right now that he does get a lot better after that, so please keep that in mind. So guys, if you'd like to follow me, we'll turn left and head up this hill. While we regroup, I'll just point out that place on the corner there. Now that's called the Endeavour Tap Room. And Endeavour was the name of Captain Cook's ship. So whenever you see Endeavour, that's what it's named after. Another very important part of detail about this building is that it's a working brewery. So if you're thirsty after the tour and you want a nice fresh beer, definitely recommend these guys. They brew on site, they have 6 taps to last till the new something different. They have served in there as well.
Huh?
Ghost tours? Yeah, they do ghost tours here in the rocks.
ದೇವಗಳು ಎಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಅಂತ ತೋರಿಸ್ತಾರೆ.
So if you believe in ghosts, if you like ghosts, check them out. But guys, right in front of us here across the street, you've got this little mall section. Now, on Saturdays and Sundays, this becomes a marketplace. So you can come here and you can buy Australian souvenirs to take back to your loved ones at home. If you aren't here,
come here on Sunday
on the weekend, but you want to get some authentic Australian souvenirs,
After the
It's only weekend market.
and the
Normally we
Bondi
get less
Big
tickets
Bus
there.
stops there, so you can jump on
Saturday
that and
we'll
jump
go.
off there if you like.
After
So,
dog race.
Paddy's Market. So guys, follow me on this way.
ಆ ಚರ್ಚ್ ಕಟ್ಟಿರುವಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಬಂಡೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೊರ್ಸಿದ್ದು ಕಳ್ಳರಿಂದ ಅಂತೆ. ಸೊ ಕಳ್ಳರಿಂದ ಕೊರ್ಸಿದ್ದು ಇಂಪ್ಯೂರ್ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆ ಚರ್ಚ್ ಕಟ್ಟಿದಾರಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಬೇರೆ ಕಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಬೇರೆ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ತರಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕಟ್ಟಿದ್ರಂತೆ. ಹೌದು, ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಡಿವಂತಿಕೆ. ಹೌದು. ಆ ಗೋಸ್ಟ್ ಟೂರ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ, ಸಾರಾ ಯು ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಗೋ ಟು ದ ಗೋಸ್ಟ್ ಟೂರ್? ಸಾರಾ ಯು ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಗೋ?
Okay guys, so before we cross over, I'll just tell you about a bit of the changing face of the Rocks area. Now, a few years ago, this area was very densely populated with public housing, or assistance housing for the poor. And that was about 2 or 3 years ago. And at that stage, about 500 people lived in public housing, until they announced the new development at Barangaroo. Has anyone been to Barangaroo yet, or planning on going there? Yes? Yeah. So it's basically right down the end of this street here. Now, before that development was announced, that area was pretty grimy dockland. Some of these public houses overlooked that dockland. But as soon as the development got announced, suddenly they became very desirable. So the government wanted to kick those people out of those houses and sell them to private investors. To do that, they basically got to get everyone in public housing out and sell them all. So over the past couple of years, that's what's been happening. So as I said, it was about 500, now it's down to less than 20, and probably going to be quickly going to hurry up. Now the government's justification for this is every place that they sell to a private investor, they can build 5 more public houses just further out west. So where you used to have a lot of public houses, now you've got a lot of Airbnbs. And there's about 3 on that block alone that I know are Airbnbs. But so that's just a bit of a change in face of Sydney and this area in particular. Now the name Barangaroo is the name of the wife of an Aboriginal elder, and his name was Benelong. And the Opera House is located on Benelong Point. So now you've got Benelong and you've got Barangaroo. So you've got the husband and wife came back together. Now the name Barangaroo, by the way, also it means bark canoe, and we'll see an example of a bark canoe further on the tour today. As I was mentioning, this church here, it's called the Garrison Church, was for the soldiers. It still maintains its military links because this church is associated with the Australian Army Reserve. And I had a reservist on a tour who told me that inside they've got various battle standards and that the baptismal font is an upturned soldier's helmet. So they still maintain that military link. And I also got told by another person on a tour that that's the church that Elton John got married in. So that's a bit of trivia for you. Now guys, off to the right here, we have Observatory Hill. Can anyone guess what's on top of Observatory Hill?
A telescope?
Yes, exactly, an observatory, and I do accept telescope as well. Now back in the day it was called Windmill Hill. Can you guess what was up there back then? Spot on. Now, it's like New Year's Eve in Times Square every day here. Can everyone see that green and white pole on top of the observatory? The weather vane at the top?
Yeah.
So every day just before 1 o'clock, a ball will slowly rise to the top of that pole. Then, at the stroke of 1, that ball will drop, and a cannon is fired from Fort Denison in the middle of the harbour. Now that was done back in the day to let the ships in the harbour know what time it was, so they could set all their navigational equipment. And it's a tradition that we still carry on to this day. What time is it? 1 o'clock. So if you're in the harbour today and hear a cannon go off, don't be alarmed. If you hear 2 go off, start to panic because we're probably under attack. Now, the observatory during peak wedding season, so summer, spring, not winter unfortunately, but during peak wedding season, there is usually a wedding at the observatory every 15 minutes. So I usually suggest to my guests with accents, and I think most of you fall under that umbrella today, if you're desperate for a drink on the weekend, head on up. Say you're a far-flung cousin from the States or Germany, get some free champagne. Anyone asks too many questions, all you got to do is do a lap of the building, and by the time you do that, there'll be a new wedding, more cousins, more importantly, more free champagne.
Yeah.
So it's like wedding practice on steroids. Now guys, what we're going to do is, and I should say, everyone can see that bandstand, rotunda, gazebo, whatever you like to call it. You can have your wedding reception in that, but to do so, there is a 3.5-year wait list. So that's a long time to fall out of love with someone. So probably an example of booking the venue, then finding Mr. Right, I think. So anyway, 3.5 years. So guys, we're going to wander down here, and I'll talk about this car.
ಆ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಇದು ಬ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್, ಆ ಬ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹಿಂದೆ ತೋರ್ಸನಲ್ಲ ಆಗ್ಲೇ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮದುವೆ ಆಗಕ್ಕೆ 3.5 ವರ್ಷ ಕಾಯ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಬುಕಿಂಗ್.
Okay guys, so this building right here is the oldest pub in Sydney. It's called the Hero of Waterloo, dating back to 1843. And unlike the church, all the sandstone in this place is very locally sourced from the Argyle Customs and Port. Now this pub here has a very nefarious history involving murder, kidnapping, the plague. So once again, if you want to learn more about the pub history and of Sydney, days 11:30 to 6:30 every day. Now one thing I'll tell you about this building before we leave, can everyone see those windows on the side of the building? Everyone notice how they're painted on? Yeah, a bit strange, isn't it? Can anyone tell me why they've been painted on?
Maybe there's a painting on the other side.
No? What's that? They're not real. No, they're definitely not real. No? Okay. So if you were on the second floor on the inside, all you'd see is a brick wall, because those windows are painted on. And they're painted on because of something called the window tax. Now in England, when this pub was being built, there was a tax on how many windows you had on your property. So the solution to the problem is just build a wall and paint the windows on. So it's basically tax evasion. Now, it never got brought into Australia, but as I said, we're afraid it was going to be. Now, has anyone heard the saying, daylight robbery?
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah. So daylight robbery means to be taken advantage of, ripped off, taken for a ride. And that's where we get it from, the window tax. Because the government were essentially robbing you of your daylight. So, daylight robbery.
Ah.
Yeah. Alright guys, we'll wander down this way. Okay guys, so remember I mentioned Barangaroo earlier and I said that her name means bark canoe? Well here we have an example of one right here. So what the native Australians, the indigenous people would do is they would peel the bark off the stringy bark tree and then over heat they'd fold it into shape and then they'd tie it off with rope made by the cabbage tree plant and then they'd pack the end with clay or mud or something to make it seaworthy. Now, then fished on the shoreline. The women fished from the boat. And these ladies were the ultimate multitaskers because they were at sea, baby in one arm, fishing rod in the other, little cooking fire going, or managing to navigate as well. They were doing it all at once. So they were the ultimate multitaskers. While the guys were just back on the shoreline spearing things. So yeah, they had it pretty easy. Now, I must mention that this is not to scale. It was a lot bigger, they weren't pygmies, and you can fit a hell of a lot more in a bigger version of that. But yes, that's it there.
ಅದು ಬೋಟು ಅಬಾರಿಜಿನೀಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ರಂತೆ. ಅವರು ಹೆಣ್ಮಕ್ಳು ಮಾತ್ರ ಸಮುದ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಫಿಶಿಂಗು, ಗಂಡಸರೆಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡೋರಂತೆ. ಅವ್ರ ಮಗುನ ಒಂದು ಕೈಲಿ ಹಿಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಫಿಶಿಂಗ್ ಬಲ್ಗೈಲಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರಂತೆ.
Let's come round so you can see the mural behind me. Let's see what's behind me here. Okay, I'm coming here to show you this mural. This mural shows you the changing face of Sydney using the different artistic mediums of the time. So right back here, instead of being 88, we've got simple line drawing. Then as we go through, we go into coloured paint. Then we move into sepia photo stock. Then we go into black and white film stock. And then around the corner, we've got colour film stock. So as I said, changing face of Sydney with the different medium. Now some of these buildings we've seen, some we're going to see very shortly. So a couple that we've seen, up the top there, Windmill Hill, now Observatory Hill, so we've seen that. Over here, we've got the old police station, right there. Very shortly we are going to see the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and also, see that building in the middle of the field there? And I mentioned Francis Greenway before, how we're going to see one of his buildings. Well, that's it, and we'll be seeing it very, very shortly. But just take note that it's not located in the middle of the field, and you'll soon find out why that would be totally. So guys, as I said, changing face. Now behind us is where the bark canoe was. That's called the Rock Discovery Museum. And this museum here, they've got artefacts from the early colonists and or the indigenous peoples that lived in this area. It's free to go through. It'll take you about half an hour to an hour to walk through it all if you read all the exhibits. And it's free, like I said, so it's definitely worthwhile having a look at. Now during school, sometimes a lot of school groups go there for excursions, and it's not uncommon to see little convicts and little marines running around. Now, one of our tour guides asked one of the teachers, well, how do you decide who's a convict and who's a marine? And apparently she said, well, the students with the best grades, they're Marines. The students who get the lower grades or have an Irish surname, they're the convicts. So if you see them running around today, you'll be able to pick which is which. Okay guys, so for those of you who are worried that we didn't fit a trip pass, we didn't, that's public access, so fear not. Now, as we walk into the door, you might have noticed there's stairs going down to a bar called the Dock House. And this is called the Dock House because downstairs used to be an opium den. So that's where the guys would go and smoke a bit of opium to chase the dragon. It's now a whiskey bar, so not as strong, but if you like the whiskey, definitely worthwhile checking out. These guys have an excellent range.
Yeah.
So it's just downstairs to the Dock House. Are you ready guys?
77B.
That's it. So from the top to the water is 134 metres. Across is 1.2 kilometres long. Each of those pylons there's 4 of them, are 94 metres high. Now those pylons are not load bearing and were not on the original plan. The original plan, when people saw it, they were afraid that the bridge would collapse. So they put the pylons in just to put everyone's mind at ease. Now as you can see in the very far one, you can see it's not even touching the steel. They're not load bearing, they're just for show. Now, if
was prefabricated in England and shipped to Australia and put together with over 6 million hot rivets.
Whoa.
Now during its construction, 14 people died, 2 by falling. There was another fellow called Vincent Kelly who fell off the bridge, but as he was falling, he claims that he was quick enough to get one of his tools, throw it at the water to break the surface tension. So when he hit it, it wasn't like concrete. Now whether he was quick enough to do that or it just fell out of his tool belt, either way, that's what happened and he survived. Because of that, the government then awarded him a gold medal. So you can consider that Australia's first gold medal for diving, if you will. Now, when the bridge was opened in 1932, the ribbon was supposed to be cut by the Premier at the time, Jack Lang. But before he could do that, a crazed local loony rode up in full military regalia on horseback and cut the ribbon with his sword, unofficially opening the bridge. Now his name was Francis de Groot, and he was arrested there and then. And he later took the Commissioner of Police to court for wrongful arrest. And he won. So how the hell he managed that, I've got no idea, but he must have had a fantastic lawyer. Now, is anyone doing the bridge climb while they're here? No? Well, you can walk across it, that's free, on street level on the right hand side. Another option you have is that very first pylon there. So you can climb the top of that pylon, and it costs about $15 as opposed to $250 plus to go over, and you still get some of the same experience. So that closest pylon, you can walk out to it and walk up. It's worth checking out. Now guys, off to my right here, we've got a brewery, and it's probably the best view from any brewery in the world, when the ship's not there, that is. So you just look out over the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, and the beautiful harbour. It's magnificent. Now, this place here is called Squire's Landing, and that's named after a fellow called James Squire. And James Squire was the first person in Australia to brew beer using hops. So he came out as a convict, managed to find a niche market, and make his fortune. So that's James Squire. There was another guy who brewed a beer like drink before him called John Boston, but he brewed his using corn and made a fiddle with a naked gooseberry. So it must have been good because James Squire came along and brewed using hops, and that was very popular. So guys, if you're ready, jump up, follow me, and we'll head down this way.
What is that queue for?
That's to go onto the cruise ship. So that's the international passenger terminal. So cruisers turn up, people jump on, jump off. So they'd be just waiting to get on board the ship, I guess. Okay, guys. So remember John Cadman? Oh, not John Cadman, I should say. Remember Francis Greenway? How I said we'll see one of his buildings. It's not very spectacular. Well, this is it. The oldest building in the rocks, dating back to a whopping great 1816 AD. Wow, I hear you say. Yes, your grandmother's place may be older than this. We're a very young country, so try and look exciting. So 1816 this was built. It was originally built as the barracks for the coxswain, and the coxswain monitored the movement of ships in the harbour. That's why in that painting, when it was in the middle of the field, it could be pretty useless, because if you're going to monitor ships in the harbour, you want to be close to the harbour. So it's called Cadman's Cottage, because the last coxswain to live here was called John Cadman, hence the name. Now, John Cadman came out here as a convict, became the coxswain. I mentioned old James Squire came out here as a convict and became a brewer. And of course we've got Francis Greenway himself, who came out here, became an architect. So a very common story where convicts will come out here, serve their time, then if they're smart or wise enough, they can find a niche, make some money, buy some land, get some respectability. So it's a very common story. They could if they wanted to, but why you'd want to trade England for sunny Sydney, I got no idea. But What was I going to say? There was convict transportation to Australia for a period of 80 years. And during that 80 years, they transported 164,000 convicts to Australia. So that was a huge chunk of the early population. And that's why there's so many people in Australia who can trace their ancestry back to a convict. I myself could do that. Mine wasn't a first fleeter, but he came out on one of the convict ships. He was a Scotsman who got sent out here for stealing tin. Now, often when I mention this...
Great-grandfather? Sorry.
It'd be great-great-great-grandfather or something, but yeah, he got sent out here for stealing tin. Now, when I mention that, oftentimes, usually if there's anyone from England on the tour, they'll throw a convict joke at me. So is there anyone here who has a convict joke they want to throw at me? No? Alright, well I'll tell you a couple that have been thrown my way. The most common one is a lady coming through customs and the customs official stops her and says, do you have a criminal record? She said, well, I didn't know you still needed one to get in. So that's one. And the other one is, what is the difference between an Australian and a tub of yogurt? If you leave yogurt in the sun for 200 years, it'll develop a culture. But anyway, so guys, follow me and we'll wander down here.
ನೀವು ಮೊಸರನ್ನ ಬಿಸಿಲ 200-200 ವರ್ಷ ಇಟ್ಟರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಅಂದರೆ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ನಮಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅವನ ಮೇಲೆ ಅವನೇ ಜೋಕ್.
Yours was all those wedges of origin and had in white gold molding. So that's how we got that design right there. The orange. Now, during its construction, it went 10 years over schedule and went 15 times over budget. The original budget was $7 million, came in at a whopping $102 million. Now, rather unsurprisingly, because of that, during its construction, Bjorn Utzon was fired from the project. And there was so much bad blood between the City of Sydney and Bjorn Utzon that when the Opera House was opened by the Queen in 1973, not only was he not invited to the party, but his name was not even mentioned. So that's how much bad blood there was between the two. However, in 1999, everybody's kit's been made up, and Bjorn Utzon now has a room named after him inside the building called the Utzon Room. And he also took on other advisory projects for the city of Sydney as well. Now, many famous people have performed inside the Opera House and on the forecourt steps. But the very first musical performance on that point was during the time of the First Fleet. Now, remember I mentioned a guy called Benelong, an Aboriginal elder? So, he and Arthur Phillip became best friends, mostly because Governor Phillip kidnapped him to England. And when he went to England, Benelong met the king. He met King George III, came back to Australia, and when he got here, he was too Aboriginal for the English, and he was too English for the Aboriginals. So it was a bit of a fish out of water. But he and Arthur Phillip were good mates. So as a gift, Governor Phillip then built a hut out on that point for Benelong. So that's why it's called Benelong Point, because that's where he had his hut. So as a thank you to the governor for building him that hut, Benelong then invited Governor Phillip to an evening of traditional song and dance as a thank you. And that was the very first musical performance on that point, in that hut.
Now, that building there is an icon of Sydney. It's a World Heritage Listed site. It's a finalist in the world, modern architectural ones in the world, and it is unfortunately about to up. So guys, I'd like to thank you for, that's a bright noise, I like hearing that noise. So guys, I'd like to thank you for coming along. I hope it's worth a few things. If you like what you saw today guys, and you'd like to put reviews online, please jump onto the TripAdvisor page for Big Buck and let them know how much fun you had, because we're trialling it for them, and if you want to see it continue so other people can enjoy it, please jump online and give feedback. Now, if anyone needs directions anywhere, the very first stop we stopped at was basically you walk across the park there and up to George Street. If you are catching the Captain Cook ferry, the Captain Cook cruise, it's Wharf 6 there. If you're catching trains, you can also catch it just there at Circular Quay Station. And if you wanted to go to the Opera House, just walk around the quay, keeping your sea on your left, and you'll get it. Now, by the way, Circular Quay used to be called Semi-Circular Quay. It makes a lot more sense because getting folks in and out of Circular Quay would be pretty difficult. But in Australia, we like to abbreviate everything, so now it's just Circular Quay. So guys, yeah, once again, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah.
Take this back to your respective places and yeah, enjoy Sydney.
Can we take a picture with you?
Yes, actually, before everyone leaves, jump in and I'll take a photo of you all for our pages and also for anyone who wants me to.
Okay, come. I've mailed it. Nah, it's okay.
Please, guys, a big quick line. Perfect. And what you take off with there?
How do we get that?
Yeah.
I'll take off the doors as well, but I'll give you that to the bus, big bus guy, and I'll leave it on.
ನಾವು ಅವನ ಜೊತೆ ಒಂದು ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋಣ. Could you please join family?
Yes.
Come. Yeah. Come on. Thank you.
All good. Alright guys, enjoy. Get home safe.
Thank you. Your name? We didn't catch.
My name's Garth.
Garth.
Garth, yeah.
Garth.
That's it. Awesome.
Thank you.